Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Rising Sign horoscope. I'm Dr. Claire Moon, and today we're going to talk about Saturn conjunct Neptune. And this video is going to be relevant for about a year because this whole Saturn Neptune stuff peaks February of 2026. So I wanted to give us a little bit of an idea between, as I record this, April 12th of 2025, between now and February 2026. Give us a bit of an idea about themes that we can expect, themes to notice as they arise, and hopefully give us a little bit of info so we can navigate things a bit more skillfully. That's the hope. So welcome back if you're joining me for another video. This is not a live. Usually I do a lot of live work. You can find that elsewhere on my YouTube channel. I do a monthly horoscope just for the month ahead. I do a monthly Q&A session for astrology if you're an astrology learner, enjoyer, want to meet other astrology nerds. So you can check that out elsewhere. Otherwise, a couple little caveats, notes about how best to use this information today. Of course, all of our birth charts are different, and the weather, the the astrology weather that is happening in the form of transits, in the form of other timing techniques, that happens on top of our root chart. And so this, again, this astrology is going to be affecting everyone a little bit differently. And so if you want specific information to you, I always recommend going and seeing a professional astrologer. But hopefully today I can give you some clues and some ways of figuring some of this stuff out on your own. Um, Now, a couple little bullet points under that note about how this stuff is going to affect everyone differently. As I give examples of what could come about in terms of themes, archetypes that we can expect with both Saturn and Neptune, and as they come together, I'm going to try to give a spectrum of delineation from more constructive things I'm excited about, honestly, when these two come together all the way to from neutral, maybe some mundane things that we might notice, all the way to difficult or challenging circumstances that this conjunction could reflect in some way. So know that it's really going to depend on the birth chart again, the condition of Saturn in your birth chart, the condition of a lot of things. Uh, and also, it's going to come out in a number of different ways. So those are my caveats. Find your rising sign. You can skip ahead, go to the rising sign part, find your rising sign. You can use, there's a lot of websites now, astroseek.com, Chani Nicholas's website. All of those are really great chart generator websites, astro.com. So go find your rising sign. I think that's it. Oh, and as well, if you feel open to sharing, if you have any things that come up that fit this, even if you're listening to this a year from now and we are getting done with all of the stuff I'm going to talk about, if you have any experiences you feel comfortable sharing, also comment below. I am always curious to hear what comes up for people. So I think with that, I think those are all of my announcements. And I think the first thing I want to do is just start with a general overview of the significations of Saturn and Neptune a bit. I'm not going to really get into it, but I want to name some things. And then I'm going to get into some dates. So, a lot of dates of interest, which are also going to be listed below if you want to copy and paste those. Um, and then finally, I will get into the rising sign horoscopes. So, Saturn. Saturn is a planet that is the last visible planet that we can see before we get into Neptune, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They are a planet of the edge, the boundary, the border. If we think about a coastline and what that represents, a boundary, a border, it's also what is distant and far away. In the northern hemisphere, Saturn is associated with the winter. And even if you look at Saturn in the sky, it's very dim, kind of this dusty mauve color. It's not bright and twinkling like Jupiter or Venus. So Saturn gets these significations of distance, far away, uh, winter, the edge, the boundary, the border. They are also limitation, constraint. We think about the winter in the northern hemisphere and how we tend to not have certain vegetables, or, well, now you can get whatever you want whenever you want, but historically we have not been able to get certain vegetables or fruits, which it's a harder time. There's literally colder work to do. There's less sun. It's literally not as bright and shiny as times of the year in the northern hemisphere that are associated with the sun and the moon. Our luminaries are light-giving bodies, very different than Saturn, who is the opposite when we don't have as much sunlight during the year. So Saturn is slow, it is delays, it is challenges. Saturn is also delayed gratification, endurance, things that last a long time, things that are old or ancient, getting help from things that are old or ancient. Saturn is agriculture, dirt, anything underneath the earth. Saturn also is discipline, mastery, um, experience, maturity, all of those things. So we can see, I mean, I just said a lot of words. Those were a lot of significations, but I think we can get a vibe for what Saturn is. And it is very structurally and orderly. I do think structure and order also has to do with Jupiter and the sun. You know, you need a center, you need an edge, and you need an organizing principle. And so you've got Saturn, edge, sun, center, Jupiter, organizing principle. But Saturn is certainly structural. It is the bones, it is our skin, the structural, hard elements, the edge, border, boundary elements, very Saturn. That's good to know. I'm glad I didn't forget that. It's good to know that the boundaries that separate and keep one things on one side or the other, that is a Saturnian function. So now that we know what Saturn is, we can move on to Neptune. And Neptune is so different in so many ways. They dissolve the boundaries and the borders and the edges. They make all of the things kind of come together. You know, it's the difference between someone who likes to have their peas and their carrots and their mashed potatoes all separated, very Saturn, versus Neptune. They're all kind of mixed together, that camp of folks. um, there can be with Neptune, because of that dissolving of boundary and border, there can be easier affinity, easier connection with others. This kind of one love, this we are all one notion that we are all part of one collective, that is all very Neptune, because again, they dissolve the borders and this idea of separateness between you and I, or you and other people. So with art, I always talk about art with Neptune, not insofar as Neptune itself is art, but I think it's art fuel. I think it's creativity fuel. Neptune, in that function of dissolving and making things ubiquitous and kind of part of all the same thing, um, easier to make connections now between ideas, objects, situations. It's great for problem solving in certain ways of being able to think outside the box. Of course, imagine and dream and vision, which Neptune is known best for, I think. But it helps us make connections, and creativity and art, which I usually think more Venus. Creativity and art, a huge part of that is making connection, connecting things that you wouldn't think would go together otherwise, or using a thing in a new way. I think a lot of that Neptune helps with those processes. So, spiritually speaking and artistically speaking, we can see the possible benefits of Neptune, constructive things about Neptune, helpful things, the ability to feel empathy, forgiveness, um, to imagine what it's like to be in someone else's position. Neptune helps with all of that as well. So that's really, really great, or can be really, really great. Neptune is inspiration. Neptune is, like I said before, imagination, vision, dreaming. Uh, and a lot of things begin in the imagination or as a dream. It's a valuable place where information comes from, the imagination and dreams. All very important information. Now, on the other side, Everything to me is a coin with two sides. I have a Pisces moon. We have two minds about everything. Um, Not as helpful things with Neptune. And I think this is going to be a lot of my focus today, which I apologize for how ad nauseum we're going to be talking about confusion, uncertainty, lack of clarity. That's also what Neptune does. They are fog. So if you take one thing away from this video today with Neptune, know that they're great for spirituality, they're great for art and creativity, connecting with others, imagining, dreaming. They are not great for material world endeavors like filling out forms, understanding all of the fine print on a thing. Um, so confusion. And just in general, we can be doing great at all of our, little tasks and goals, and we still just don't understand how it's going to turn out. The outcome is so hard to see. So that just lack of clarity about the future or lack of clarity about outcomes, that is a very Neptunian thing. That's an influence that they have. So, I've already started to hear it, and I was wondering when I would start to hear it more and more and more in the news, the word uncertainty. So, again, it's April 12th, 2025. I am an avid PBS NewsHour person. I watch it all the time. And this week, I have really started to hear the word uncertainty for the record, just to get it into the recording. I really started to notice it. And I guess let's get into uh, where they are because we're going to be working with different orbs and we're already, I mean, we've been within the 10-degree orb of Saturn conjunct Neptune for a while. So I'll get into my dates in a second. But all to say, we're in it. I'm hearing the word uncertainty. It's coming up. So last thing about Neptune in general and this uncertainty, lack of clarity, fog that we're walking through, there's two pieces of, I guess, advice. If you feel like taking it, take it or leave it. It's what I tell everyone in my sessions, basically, when we're talking about Neptune and when we're talking about the Saturn and Neptune stuff specifically. Just keep taking the next 2 or 3 steps that you know are skillful or helpful to take. And you might not know the next steps after that, but just keep taking the next 2 steps or so, and the next step that you know is helpful to take. And sometimes that's a really small thing, like just sitting and taking a breath and not like doing anything. That's the next most skillful thing to do. And sometimes it is, okay, I am going to fill out this form, or I am going to send this person an email and ask them a question. So just keep kind of taking the next step and the next step. Uh, and that is going to really be helpful, I think, as an approach for not for everything in life. I don't think this, and we'll see here, there's going to be 3 houses I'm going to be focusing on that are going to be the focuses of this uncertainty or lack of clarity. It's not going to be all over our life, but with the topics, if there is seemingly more uncertainty than there's been, and that keeps happening over the next year, I think this advice is going to be really valuable for those life topics that are uncertain between now and March or April of 2026. So keep taking the next step or two that you know to take. And then the second thing that I think might be helpful to know or just to hear, which is kind of unsatisfying for a lot of people. And I think it was unsatisfying for me when I first heard it. But this is straight from uh, Buddhism and the practice of Vipassana, where there's this practice of just free awareness, seeing what comes up, noticing it for what it is, and not adding on any story about it. So if a thought arises, and letting it go and not building on it. If a feeling or a sensation arises, like say a pain, letting it come up, seeing it for what it is, letting it go and not making a story about, oh my God, this is going to be forever. In this case, with discomfort and confusion, which confusion is uncomfortable usually. The idea is to just see it as confusion, to be with the discomfort that is going along with the confusion or uncertainty, and just being with it and being like, yep, this is what confusion is like. This is the verbiage that Joseph Goldstein uses, and I think where he I'm sure he gets it. I've heard it around, but we say, this is what that's like. This is that. This is sadness. This is confusion. This is pain. Um, and just seeing it for what it is and leaving it there and going back to step one of, all right, what's the next most skillful thing to do? I am confused, and what's the next most skillful thing to do? And then I think putting it back on that agency piece can give us a little sense of sanity. Okay, I'm going to focus on this task or this waiting. Sometimes it really is about not doing a thing and it is about waiting. But then knowing that that is a choice that you are making for strategic reasons can be really, really helpful in grounding and feeling a little bit more in control of the situation amidst the fog. Because, yeah, I guess last thing about it too, with the uncertainty piece, neurochemically speaking, and I've mentioned this before, so apologies for everyone who's heard me say this a billion times. When we have certainty, when we feel like we know what's going on, we get happy chemicals in our brain, like oxytocin, calming chemical, and that our bodies naturally make. Um, Serotonin, probably dopamine. And this is whether or not we're correct. We might be dead wrong, but if we feel like we know, we feel a lot better, like physically. And so when we are in confusion, a lack of knowing, there's not that influx of calming neurochemicals that are happening. So it literally doesn't feel good. Or it's literally like kind of this neutral, not necessarily like good feeling state, confusion, which is not as good compared to feeling certain, right? So all to say, just to validate, if the next year there are certain areas of our life where we're feeling a little unclear about how this is gonna go, or not sure what to do, yeah, that's very real. You're not imagining it. And one last really important note with Aries topics over the next 14 years, the house topics associated with Aries, and the life house topics associated with Capricorn and Aquarius over the next year and a half, is that things that come in, people, ideas, places, inspirations, give them a bit more time to prove themselves before you commit. So I directly get this from Robert Hand. I just want to name that source. But of course, it makes sense if there's a lack of clarity, and especially with Saturn around commitment. I think we want to make sure that we understand all the fine print. We understand the situation really well before we commit a lot of time, investment, energy, etc., to a situation, a project, an idea, anything. So again, for Capricorn Aquarius topics, life topics, house topics over the next year and a half, you know, go slow with new things, make sure that they've proved themselves before you commit to them, as best you can. And with Aries house topics, really till like 2039, but especially when Neptune is going to be like, if Neptune is over any planets or points that you have in Aries by, say, 3 degrees or less. Um, Also, making sure that things that are coming in are making themselves very clear and known before you commit. And one thing I should add about Neptune is that they can also be intuition. So, especially for, say, Aries rising in your first house, or even Aquarius rising or Leo rising, with Aries in your third and ninth houses of divination, Neptune going in there could be such a huge boost for your intuition. If you have any Aries planets, Neptune going into there, it might increase the intuitive potential, the intuitive connectivity. So that's one other theme that I want us to notice. And I mean, honestly, like listen to, take advantage of is the strong intuition, the stronger potential for intuitive connection, intuitive insight over the next year and a half, especially for like your Saturn ruled places, and for the next 14 years for your Aries stuff. Uh, for topics ruled by Saturn, so house topics having to do with Capricorn and Aquarius, these are areas where we're going to want to use our intuition. We're going to want to listen to those intuitive nudges around, for this, just as an example, for Aries rising, around friends and groups, around career moves, around life path stuff, big trajectory moves. There might be more following of intuition than you're used to or comfortable with. But for the next year or so, yeah, that might be part of the information that you're using to navigate 10th and 11th house areas of life. So, I just wanted to point that out, that Neptune is intuition. And so intuition might also be brought much more into the Capricorn Aquarius parts of life and the Aries parts of life. More intuition, more of an intuitive connection coming in. So let's talk about what it's like having these two planets together. So again, as I was mentioning before, we've got Saturn, who is challenges, delays, what is old. Um, Saturn is mature, has boundaries, discipline, all that. Neptune is very open, free, loosey-goosey. It's very different. How do you have boundaries when Neptune is around? Uh, how do you have energetic boundaries? How do you have, all kinds of boundaries? And that might be depending on who you are, depending on your chart. If you tend to be more open to energetic influences, open to just environmental influences, over the next year, might have to try a little extra hard, put a little extra effort into boundaries. It's like we can imagine Saturn being like someone building up a sand kind of hill so that the water can't break through. And Neptune is like the waves that just keep eroding the sand. So it's like we're trying to have this boundary and barrier, but Neptune just keeps trying to erode it. So again, the point there, the headline is to be extra on top of your boundaries for the next year, really. Um, and if it's difficult, whether that's because there's a desire to be deeply compassionate and generous, and it's like, how do I do generosity in a way that is sustainable over the long term so that I can give for longer and more? That might be a hard kind of thing to keep balance of over the next year with these two planets together. At the same time, okay, is it that there's going to be a difficulty with it, one end of that difficult end of the spectrum, or is it that, maybe Saturn's coming in and with energetic stuff or other topics, Saturn is like, hey, let's have some boundaries. And maybe you're having boundaries for the first time, especially in, or maybe the first time in a long time in Aries. So I think there are some constructive ways that Saturn and Neptune could come together insofar as clearing up a lack of boundary. But if you're someone who's already got a lot of good boundaries in place, you might also notice the opposite of like, okay, Neptune is kind of making it a little more difficult than normal to hold these firm or, firm enough. Of course, it's good advice all the time, but especially in Pisces, flexible boundaries, you know, boundaries are made to keep people in, usually in the interpersonal sense. What else about these two together? Um, I love the idea. One of the constructive things I'm really excited about with Saturn and Neptune coming together is the ability to dream and imagine and think of all the ideal ways that the world could be. And then Saturn coming in and saying, let's build it. How much time do we need? How much people do we need? How much money do we need? All of those real world considerations that Saturn brings to the big lofty dreams of Neptune. What a great combo, you know? That's really, really, it can be that inspired long-term effort. Um, Especially it's interesting in this last decan of Pisces, there are these topics that come up around devotion and really like taking inspired action toward a thing in a way that is just full, wholehearted. And Saturn is a planet of commitment. I did forget to mention that. Saturn is about commitments, right? So, what inspired commitments, what spiritual commitments are going on as Saturn and Neptune are coming together? That's another question. Are there uncertainties or lack of clarity around commitments? I feel like when we get Neptune and Saturn together, this is a recipe for expectations. And those expectations could be very positive or like hopeful. They could be very pessimistic. Expectations are natural. It is part of the goal making process, I think, in some ways, in the hope and the faith department. But if we hold too tightly to expectations, it is that recipe for suffering and for disappointment later on. So, over the next year, as we see these planets together, noticing where do I have standards and expectations and how are they being communicated? Are they being honored or understood? I think those are all valuable questions. I think those are my main things. So, Neptune's going to have an effect on Saturn. Saturn's going to have an effect on Neptune. They're going to be mixing together sometimes to have a different third secret outcome. But I think if we can, over the next year, in especially now, I'm going to add on the Aries part of our chart, the Capricorn and the Aquarius part of our chart. That's where I want us to look for where we might see confusion, where we might see uncertainty or lack of clarity, and where we might have to be extra clear over the next year, over communicate, double check things, triple check things, cross your T's, dot your I's, as they say, due diligence, all of these Neptune antidotes that are a bit more Saturnian. I think that is going to be a really good way to handle this. And again, just being with the confusion as well and knowing that it will clear up in 2026. So when we are also trying to upkeep our boundaries, when we are managing our energetic boundaries, it's going to be especially important to do that, to watch those areas of life that are involved with Aquarius, Capricorn, and Aries. Again, those specific life house topics. That's where we're going to have to work extra hard to keep our boundaries healthy and managed and enforced and communicated. And as well with expectations. So, as I go through the rising sign horoscopes, these are the areas where we might have to be with some of this uncertainty over the next year, but then know it'll get better gradually, increasingly after February of 2026. So we just have to get our buns to then in this regard. And finally, I guess it's worth saying that uh, wherever Neptune now is, with Aries, Neptune is going to be adding that creativity, that beautiful spiritual, inspirational kind of presence to those Aries life topics, and also confusion, uncertainty around those life topics. But we can also think about where is Neptune no longer? And Neptune is no longer in Pisces. So while we're here talking about Saturn and Neptune, let's also mention that Neptune is no longer in the Pisces Virgo axes. And so, whatever those life topics are that are associated with those houses, that stuff now should have more clarity, more certainty. Um, I know the nodes are in there. I did leave the nodes up here on purpose because they're they're just too close to not be part of this conversation. So the Virgo Pisces axis isn't totally done with some of this kind of funkiness. I think Neptune can provide some. I think Neptune is an agent of confusion. Rahu, the North Node, can also be an agent of confusion. That's for another year and a half. I mean, at this point, closer to about a year, another year of this. That being said, Neptune getting out of Pisces, I think it's going to help. It's going to help with if there is any issues with understanding those topics of life, it should get better now. So good luck with that. But that's worth mentioning. And, Neptune is also no longer sending an opposition to Virgo. So I think Virgo too is going to be another set of life topics that I expect to get more clear, more certain increasingly, and especially once the nodes get out of there in about a year. So with that, let's get into the datey dates. So within the orb of 10 degrees, if we really want to look at maybe where this got going, we can look back to June of 2024. And this is the point where Saturn and Neptune are within 10 degrees. And for the slower moving planets, I've seen other astrologers, particularly like Richard Tarnas, use an orb of 10 degrees, at which point we may start to be able to perceive more clearly the archetypes that that conjunction is reflecting. At this point now, we should theoretically be starting to see significations come up more and more and more. So, increasingly, I mean, one way that this has definitely been coming out in the world is AI and how it's very difficult to tell what's real or what's not real. And increasingly, that is going to be the case. It's going to be more and more difficult to tell what's real and not real all the way into mid 2026. Uh, I'm hoping that we'll get some legislation, just a little opinion. I wonder if, a speculation, next year when Saturn gets on the other side of Neptune, if there will be legislation coming up about having to post in a photo or video if it is AI content or not, and make that like a thing that people have to do. So, anyway, June 2024 is really when this kicked off. And then a little bit closer to now, the next point that's interesting is adherence. So, within 3 degrees, that gets going in May of 2025. So, in about a month, we're going to see Saturn get within 3 degrees of Neptune. This is the orb at which we should be feeling and seeing and noticing these themes of Saturn conjunct Neptune most intensely. And then from May of 2025 to really about April of 2026, we're going to have them within 3 degrees of each other. So we can watch Saturn and Neptune over the next months, the next several months. They continue to hang out within this 3 degree orb of each other. There is a little blip. They get about 4 degrees away from each other when Saturn stations retrograde, but then they station direct and they get right back into that 3 degree orb. So effectively, for most purposes, they're going to be within that 3 degree orb with each other from May of 2025 to April of 2026. Now, Saturn Neptune within 1 degree orb, that's going to be between June of 2025. We get two within 1 degree hits between June of 2025 and August of 2025. So they're going to get very, very close June, July, August. And then they back off a bit, go back into that adherence range. But then February of 2026 is when we get the exact conjunction. February 20th. So, I mean, again, they're so close for many, many months. I don't think on February 20th people are going to get knocked over the head with anything, or, you know, I'm sure we're going to know kind of what the content is that holds confusion, or that has some confusion entangled with it. I think we're probably going to be aware, you know, by that point. So then February 2026 it peaks, and then Saturn is really going to start to mosey, and they're going to start to get some space away from Neptune. Now they're going to get 10 degrees away and then station retrograde mid 2026. And they're going to come back within 6 degrees of Neptune, but they're never going to come back and join Neptune again in an adherence or a conjunction. So it really is February 2026. And then after that, we're going to see these themes of Saturn having to navigate confusion, or, our dreams and our visions having pessimism on them. That kind of stuff should clear up mid 2026. So really, again, it's about a year that we're navigating these two planets, experiencing each other, and what is that going to look like? So, getting to that point, I think that is the end of my datey dates. And just for the record, Neptune is going to be in Aries for about 14 years, and Saturn is going to be in Aries for 2.5, 3 years. So, really, the first few years of Neptune in Aries, it's going to be an interesting flavor because it's not just Neptune in Aries. Saturn is also going to be here, very much counterbalancing what Neptune brings. So then, I mean, I know this is getting way ahead, but eventually, when we get Saturn out of Aries, we'll be having a very different experience of Neptune and Aries on its own. Just to just to give a little wider picture for those who are interested in that. So, last thing with the rising sign horoscopes to keep in mind, know that Saturn's experience of confusion, that is going to be about a year and a half tops effect. So, as I'm talking about Capricorn and Aquarius today, any confusion with those life topics, I expect to last for about a year and a half at the most. Whereas confusion, lack of clarity around Aries house topics, now that is that 14-year experience that's going to last until 2039. That's a different thing. So I just want to be clear that, especially as insofar as Capricorn and Aquarius are concerned, that effect, we just have to get through the next year and a half. Okay, that was my last point. Let's get into the rising sign horoscopes. Okay, Aries. Neptune is now in your first house of self, your mind, your body, your spirit, as well as your general circumstances, which I know is a vague phrase, and it is like your general circumstances. So, what's kind of generally around you, your kind of general experience from day to day, that can also be said to be first house. What's in your general life? But first house is better known, of course, as identity, appearance, mind, body, spirit. Now, Neptune in here, Neptune, maybe you're going to get more spiritual. Maybe you're going to have more spiritual experiences. Maybe life in general is just going to get more spiritual. That can come in the form of, just life being more serendipitous and seeing more omens and seeing more synchronicities out there. Neptune can be, more transcendental type of experiences as well. So that can be a very interesting and cool thing. Uh, Artistically speaking, whether or not you're an artiste, if you're a creative person or creativity is a part of your life, a part of your work, if problem solving is a part of your work, Neptune can be creativity fuel. So they can really help you with that in general. So if you notice yourself being a bit more creative, connecting things in new and exciting ways, um, use it to your best ability. Have fun. Um, Neptune is also, of course, uncertainty, lack of clarity. So if you're noticing confusion, things being unclear, not knowing how things are going to turn out, just in general, things feeling less clear. If around yourself, identities, there's confusion, which is a natural part of life. Cyclically, I think a lot of us have confusion around identity or roles that we're holding. That may be the case. Now, depending on where your ascendant degree is, that's really going to make a difference. So, for people who have their ascendant degree early in Aries, you're going to be noticing this stuff now, essentially. And these effects of Neptune, the cool ones, the less cool ones, those are going to wane probably as Neptune gets away from your ascendant degree over the following years. Whereas folks who say, like in this made up chart for February 20th, 2026, if they had a late degree ascendant, as Neptune approaches the end of Aries over the next 14 years, over the 2030s, you're going to be noticing these effects of Neptune more and more and more. Now, the last thing with Neptune in the first house, which is kind of specific to the first, and I am not giving health advice, But if you are noticing, if you're someone who needs to maintain boundaries around health or health practices a little bit more than other people, say if you have an elimination diet or a special diet, or let's say you've got a special like me, like I'm very allergic to like artificial fragrances, which are in everything. Artificial fragrances in so many things. And so I have to be really careful about like my laundry detergent, my fabric softener, if I don't even use fabric softener anymore. But you get my drift. Like you got to be more careful about what's in your environment because there could be confusion. And sometimes it's you're doing your due diligence, you're doing all of the things that you should be doing, but someone around you or the environment around you that they don't understand or something. And so then your environment ends up having something that you didn't know about, you know? Uh, I don't want to scare anyone or make anyone paranoid, but this is what everyone told me when Neptune was going over my moon. I think it's equally as important when Neptune is in your first house in terms of your physical body, your health, your wellness. If you're an allergic type person, you might have to just do your best, but do your due diligence. There's confusion about, and I did notice as well, there were a few times where uh, Neptune over my moon, I would be like, I was giving a dog a medication for a friend, and the pharmacy had done an error. And so there was confusion in the dosing of something that was in my surroundings. So, and particularly in this case with my sixth house lord. So watching those things while Neptune is especially near your ascendant degree, I would say. So watching that. And that's going to be a special consideration for particularly Aries rising and probably also Scorpio rising with Neptune being in their sixth. Now, Saturn and Neptune being together, that means that also your 11th house and 10th house are going to be experiencing these Neptunian increases in spirituality and creativity, but also confusion. So, your career life. You may not know how it's going to turn out for a while. It may be that you are walking through that fog and taking the next step and the next two steps and the next two steps that you know are skillful to take, like we talked about before. Similarly, with friends and groups, they may be getting more spiritual. Your career may be getting more spiritual. Your path, your general life path may be getting more spiritual. Um, your friends and groups as well. Maybe they are the ones that are getting spiritual and you're just kind of like, okay. Maybe it's not you, maybe it's them. Um, your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, the 11th house. Perhaps those are getting really inspiring, really lofty, really ideal. Like, oh man, what if we went for this? And that's great. Shoot for the stars. You'll at least land on the moon or whatever the saying is, that I still don't know. I still haven't Googled it. I don't care. I like my kind of Rickyism version of it. Uh, but yeah, these topics, 10th house topics, 11th house topics for the next year and a half. There could be more spirituality for a little bit for the next year and a half. Follow your intuition, follow the omens about friends and groups and about career. It might be that the information about those topics is coming in through that Neptunian filter, which is very synchronicity-ish. And yeah, if there is confusion with those topics as well, just keep doing the best that you can, knowing that there's probably going to be a lot more clarity in 2026, in mid 2026. And especially keep your bearings. February of 2026, that might be the peaking of a lot of this type of energy. Uh, Spirituality, creativity, intuition, and confusion. Good luck, Aries rising. Let's look at Taurus. Now, for you, the areas of life that might be becoming more spiritual, more artistic, might be the 12th house of your spiritual life. So your spiritual life's about to get more spiritual. I think about the 12th as our core private practices that upkeep our mental health, our emotional health. And so let's say you're someone who's done like the mindfulness-based stress reduction in the past. Neptune going into your 12th might be more like, oh, I'm actually going to learn like Vipassana or Samadhi meditation and learn about its actual roots or something like that. So it's like we're about to get more into it. Uh, Also, a lack of clarity potentially around these things. If you're trying new things, sometimes there's that period of time where we don't know if a practice is really going to work out for us, if it's really going to like fix or help a problem. Um, so there might be a little lack of clarity around 12th house topics as well, which again, 12th house topics here, I'm talking about mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and related practices. The 12th house is also a place of solitude, but also potentially loneliness. So, spiritual or artistic, creative approaches to working with suffering, to working with loneliness, that would very much fit. Also, a lack of clarity. Why am I feeling lonely when I'm surrounded by people? That would be one way that there might be confusion around 12th house loneliness. So, those things might be there. And again, if you have any planets or points in Aries, it's going to be more intense when Neptune is closer to those by degree. Now, specifically for, well, I guess before I go to the Saturn ruled areas, it could be very cool with Neptune in the 12th. I mean, that is priming you for some very transcendental experiences if you have a nice, safe container for that. It could be a very, very insightful time for the next 14 years. So good luck. I personally have Neptune in the 12th in my birth chart, and I'm projecting a little bit because, like, yeah, I think it's really helped me to experience some extra spiritual stuff. Um, okay, for your 10th house of career, life path, public life, those topics might be getting more spiritual or more creative, more artistic. One thing I should have put in earlier with Neptune is with the illusion, like fantasy, dreaming, imagining of Neptune, we also get like a glamour factor. And so, with Neptune really affecting this place of public life for the next year, year and a half, if you've got public roles or anything you need to share widely, this could be a time of potentially like having an easier time making it look good and kind of selling that like vision that you got there. So I think that it could be really helpful depending on what your career is. And in other ways for career and life path and public life, things are going to get less clear for a bit. Or again, going through the fog, you're only going to be able to see the next two or three steps that are going on and not the usual wider view that you can see of things, which can be pretty disconcerting for people who have Saturn ruling over their 10th house. They generally want that, 5, 10 year plan at least. So hang in there for a year. There may also be a lot of world building potential here, I think. With Saturn being that realistic structural agent and Neptune being that ultimate vision of what it could be, this could be over the next year a time of great imagining and building in your life path and career. And that's kind of the nature of uh, lack of clarity is the nature of doing those things. I think anyone who creates something, artists, people who create big projects, or even me creating this practice, um, I never know how it's going to turn out. It's always pretty mysterious. Now, maybe not everyone's chart functions like mine, but I think it's just a very natural experience for anyone who's like building something new that yeah, you're not sure. That's why it's scary. That's why not everyone builds stuff. Because yeah, you don't know how it's going to turn out. So that's just the nature of it. So it's nothing to be scared of, I guess is my point. Now in the ninth house, now we're getting Neptune influencing the Lord of the ninth house as well, if you're a Taurus rising. And that could be that your beliefs, your worldviews, which do not have to be spiritual or religious, by the way. The ninth house expands much beyond that. It's not just religion, it is any philosophy or worldview. But now touched by Neptune, yeah, now maybe things get more spiritual. Maybe things get more esoteric or occult or obscure. Um, yeah, it could just be more transcendental, even, further. Uh, so there could be some shifts in views over the next year. There could be confusion with the views. If we look at the ninth as views, philosophies, whether that is an intentional period of confusion because you're learning. If you're in college, you're learning a bunch of stuff, you're like, I didn't know about any of this, I barely understand it. That is like another natural place where confusion can come in, is in the process of learning. So that would be very fitting over the next year. But if there's any confusion with views or philosophies, you may have to just sit with that confusion for about a year and know that there might be peak confusion around February and then 2026. And then as we move further into 2026, I expect these things to clear up and to have a little bit more clarity and certainty around how you see the world much more in 2026. So let yourself be in process with that. There's nothing wrong with that. The ninth house is also long distance travel. So this is your alert Taurus rising for the next year. So I would leave earlier for the airport than you usually do. Give yourself extra time. Any long distance travel stuff, double check, pretend like it's a Mercury retrograde. Because there could be confusion or lack of clarity around long distance travel stuff. And also publishing, broadcasting, any mass communication. Likewise, there might be some difficulty around confusion or lack of clarity when you're trying to do those things, and you might have to work a little bit harder to maintain clarity for about a year. What else am I missing? Advanced education, views, long distance travel. Yeah, confusion around if you are someone who is getting done with high school or someone who is, trying to pick a major in college. This year is kind of difficult for having a lot of clarity around like, yeah, I'm going to pick this major. I'm going to go on this path. So letting that be a bit more open-ended this year too might be what's going on. Don't feel bad if it's not super clear to you, or if you just kind of pick something and you have to switch later, that's okay. All right, that's it for Taurus rising. Good luck with this one. And then we've got Gemini rising. Now, Neptune has gone into your 11th house. So, friends, groups could be getting more spiritual in nature. There might be more creativity and cross-pollination and blending of friends and groups over the next 14 years. It might be a lot of inspired people in your groups or organizations, a lot of inspired action. It could be a lot of creativity or artistry happening in your groups or with friends. And the friends themselves could be the ones that are spiritual. Maybe you are not. Maybe you're not getting more spiritual, but your friends or a friend is. Uh, the 11th house is a place of hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And so Neptune might be bringing a lot of inspiration a little like, more widely, just finding it easier to be inspired in general for the next 14 years. That's great. Neptune, though, is also a lack of clarity. They can be confusion. And so with friends and groups, you might have to try a little extra hard over the next several years to maintain clarity if need be, to avoid confusion, to just do your extra due diligence, extra labors in making sure things are clear. And that sometimes you can do as much as you can do, and it's actually the other people who are having a hard time with confusion, lack of clarity. So that might be what's going on. There might be confusion about certain friendships and how they're going. There might be a lot of inspiration around friendships. So Neptune's going to be bringing both of those things into the 11th house. Now, Saturn ruling your ninth and eighth houses, this means that Neptune is also going to be affecting those areas of life. So there may be a change in views or philosophies over the next year, year and a half that lean you more toward spiritual, uh, connected types of practices, especially spiritual or philosophical views that have you interacting with groups or spiritual or philosophical groups. There's some connection here with Saturn bringing those ninth house topics into the 11th, and Neptune is making it very inspired, creative, artistic, or spiritual. The views themselves, the ninth house isn't just religion, it isn't just spirituality. The ninth house is just any worldview, any philosophy that we have. And in this case, those worldviews and philosophies may be becoming more spiritually infused over the next year, which is really interesting. Now, something that I should have mentioned earlier with friends, boundaries, energetic boundaries, time boundaries, whatever boundaries, might have to be working a little extra hard to maintain those over the next year and a half, uh, especially if there are friends or groups where there's not agreement around views, if there's not agreement around philosophies. It might be a little hard with Neptune around for Saturn to maintain composure, to maintain boundary between self and maybe actions that don't behoove us. Or it might be harder to maintain energetic boundaries, which, to just get into that for a second, if someone's sitting at the table with you at a political meeting or something, like I'm thinking of someone in like a local politic meeting or something, a town hall meeting, and there's someone seething with anger or contempt across the table. How able are you to keep that energy at bay, to not let it get in, to not have you identifying with that energy of contempt? Those types of boundaries are going to be harder to maintain with Neptune around. So just know over the next year, just do your best. Do your best. Uh, Getting back though to Saturn and Neptune. So Neptune affecting the ninth house. Now, beliefs, views, lots of creativity there this year as well. Uh, Long distance travel though, this is your warning to leave early for the airport for the next year or so. There could be confusion. I'm kind of worried about the delay nature of it with Saturn being around. So traffic being slow or other delays that can happen in the course of long distance travel. But with Neptune around, there's just straight up confusion or lack of information or lack of clarity. So if you are doing any long distance travel, Gemini rising, especially over the next year, until I would say March, April of 2026, do your extra work in double checking the dates, the times, the prices, everything to do with the long distance travel. If you are someone who is a mass communicator, if you have a podcast, if you are a writer, a publisher, anyone who's sharing anything broadly, there might be confusion or lack of clarity around those things, whether it's the technology or the reception of it or the doing of it. So this could be, a bit of a year in terms of just walking through that fog, taking the next 2 or 3 steps are skillful to take toward your goals, toward your aspirations, even if you don't know the outcome. So really probably having to let go of the outcome more than normal over the next year till mid 2026. Uh, Advanced education. If you are in college or continuing education programs, if you are trying to decide within those programs what to focus on, it could be a hard year of having a lot of clarity around that, around what to study, how your studies are going to turn out. It might be like, wow, I love my degree, but I have no idea how it's going to work out in this economy. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's a real point of confusion. I don't need to even use astrology to say that there's a lot of people who, in America at least, are very uncertain about a lot of things. So hang in there until like March of 2026. I expect us to start feeling, Gemini risings to start feeling a lot more clear. So hang in there till March 2026, at which point I expect that Gemini risings should be starting to feel a lot more clear around those ninth house topics. Now, to talk about Neptune influencing eighth house topics, there could be more spirituality or more types of spiritual exploration around eighth house topics of death, end of life, the preparation for the end of life. So this could be actually for Gemini rising a year of really considering like what do I want the end of my life to look like spiritually speaking? What do I want my estate management to go down like based on my spirituality? Or what I want the service to look like, you know? So those spiritual kinds of considerations with end of life, pretty fruitful stuff to think about for the next year. No matter what age you are, you do not have to be old to plan these things. There could be more creativity, inspiration. You know, maybe you hear, it's kind of morbid, but it's like, could be here, like you could hear a song that you're like, oh yeah, put it in the advanced directives. We're playing it at the celebration of life. You know, like, so how is that inspiration getting put into the eighth house? It can come out like that. It is also a place of collaboration, sharing of resources, other people's resources. So maybe they or group projects are getting more inspired, more creative, artistic, flexible, spiritual. Maybe there's a lot of forgiveness and kind of this kind of cohesiveness with collaboration that Neptune can bring with bringing things together that normally might have a harder time coming together. At the same time, confusion, lack of clarity around eighth house topics. So, a lack of clarity if you are estate management and planning. If it's hard to find the things that you need to find or to do the things that you need to do, if it's not clear which form you need to get, yeah, that might be the case mid 2025 to mid 2026, essentially. I'd say it's going to get better around March, April of 2026. Keep taking the next 2 or 3 steps you know are skillful to take. Be there with the confusion. This is what confusion is like. Complex finances are an eighth house thing. So stocks, bonds, tradings, 401ks. Now, it's not just Gemini risings. There's a lot of people whose complex finances are going through a lot of uncertainty right now, given the world economies. And so, yeah, pretty much, especially peaking in February of 2026, lots of uncertainty around there. And then it starts to wane, and clarity is going to come in more and more as we get into March, April, May of 2026. So hang in there around those topics. Again, just take the steps you know are skillful to take. With collaborations, sharing of resources, time, energy, ideas. Be very clear with each other. Clear is kind, even if it's hard to have the conversation. Neptune can be confusion. Nothing worse than doing group work and having confusion with people. So making sure tasks and roles are identified, assigned, deadlines are assigned, keeping running kind of a tight ship more than you normally would over the next year when it comes to group projects of any kind. And other people's resources. If you have a spouse, a partner, this could look like their resources, their finances being very unclear or uncertain, peaking in February of 2026, and then onward, hopefully, more and more clarity coming in as Saturn moves away from Neptune. I think that's all I have for you. I guess, you know, one more thing with Gemini rising, if you are midheaven, whole sign houses, if your midheaven is over in the ninth house, Saturn ruling your midheaven, that means again over the next year. So creativity, spirituality with the career path, with the public life, maybe more glamour, more Neptune really helps with that glamour element and like looking good in public. Or giving a certain visage in public. If you need to do that for your work, very helpful over the next year. And also confusion with the career. If your midheaven, if your MC is in the ninth house, whole sign, then that uncertainty and lack of clarity is also going to apply potentially to career life path. Hang in there for a year. It'll get better in 2026. Okay. Good luck, Gemini rising. Cancer rising. We have Neptune in your 10th house of career, life path, your public life. your public presenting image. And Neptune up here, they are going to increase potentially the inspiration in this area, maybe feeling more inspired about career, potentially getting almost a spiritual angle to the life path. Like this is, a bigger than me, or this is kind of that quote unquote hero's journey thing about the career, like very Neptune in the 10th. If it serves you, Neptune being illusion, fantasy, they have a glamour element. They can do a glamour. So for the next 14 years, you may have that advantage with Neptune in the 10th. If you're an artist, then Neptune is creativity fuel. Have fun for the next 14 years. Neptune is also confusion and lack of clarity. So as Neptune is in the 10th till 2039, there may be, depending on where your midheaven is. So let's pretend that this person's midheaven is like in early Aries. The maximum peak of that uncertainty and confusion in career is going to be now, as Neptune is in this early part of Aries. And then as Neptune moves away, further and further as we get to 2039, that clarity and confusion should wane along with the distance that it makes. If your midheaven is in late Aries, then that increase in confusion over the next decade. Maybe now you're not feeling it. Maybe now you're like, I know exactly where I'm going. I know exactly where the ship's headed. Might get less clear over the next 14 years. It's okay. It happens. So just want to name that little nuance. Now, Saturn is here, and Saturn also rules the 8th and the 7th. And so those topics are going to be affected by Neptune. And so Neptune's kind of forgiveness, inclusivity, oneness, that is going to be applied to partnership and collaboration. And that can be really beautiful. It can increase the generosity factor, it can increase the forgiveness factor. Make sure your boundaries are strong so that things are fair, reciprocal, and sustainable so that you can keep being generous for a longer period of time and not have resentment or regret on the other side of that. Boundaries can be tough for Saturn when Neptune is around. So for the next year, really be strong and not like rigid or stiff, but you know, uh, firm enough with your boundaries with partnerships, business partners, marriage partners, patients, clients, any one-on-one thing, and how you're sharing your time, money with them. Uh, Now, Neptune is spirituality. So this could be the others over the next year. Maybe others in your life are becoming more spiritual, creative, artistic. Maybe the ways that you're collaborating with people are becoming more inspired, creative, artistic, spiritual. That could be really beautiful. Um, Also, Neptune is confusion. Neptune is uncertainty. And so, with especially over the next year, peaking in February of 2026, uncertainty around partners, uncertainty around even not the partners themselves, but maybe the approach to partnership, how you do relationship. There can be confusion or uncertainty around that, around the partnerships themselves, around maybe it's the other people who are confused or uncertain about something in their life that has nothing to do with your relationship, because sometimes Saturn is just the other person. They could be confused, and maybe you're supporting them while they are confused. That could be the case. Confusion could come into the seventh house in the terms of just logistics with others, where to meet, when, with who. So, doing your due diligence over the next year, especially till about February, March of 2026, to just do your best to be clear, double check things, be kind if other people are having trouble with clarity. And then the eighth house. This is also going to be influenced a bit more by Neptune over the next year, peaking in February 2026 and then waning off. The eighth house is collaboration. So, again, being extra clear around collaboration, expectations, they're natural, they happen. A lot of times they're based on certain standards and values that we have. making sure that those expectations with others and in collaboration are clearly stated and understood so that they don't create a kind of recipe for disappointment later on. Um, so that in relationship might be a lot of focus of areas to try to make sure we're extra clear. The eighth house is complex finances. So there might be a lot of uncertainty, lack of clarity around retirement, stocks, bonds, debts, taxes, doing your best to just walk through that fog, taking the next 2 or 3 steps you know are still skillful to take, including calling your financial advisor if there's confusion around what to do. The eighth house is death and end of life topics, including the logistical, financial, spiritual parts of managing that transition. And so Neptune potentially making end of life considerations much more spiritual, creative, inspired, kind of morbidly. It could be, being inspired and being like, yeah, this is what I would like for my advanced directives or for my end of life, celebration or funeral. Uh, all of that might be a bit more touched by Neptune, which could be cool. But with the logistical financial part of estate management and planning, Neptune doesn't really do us any favors. It might be confusing, like which forms or people to talk to, how to navigate certain end of life topics. Might be very confusing over the next year. Just keep walking through that confusion, being with the confusion, and doing the things that you know are helpful to do or not do. Uh, but that's for the next year going to be a place where there could be some confusion. I think that's all I have for Cancer rising. Good luck. Now we're going to talk to Leo. So, Leo, Aries is your ninth house. So, Neptune has now gone into your ninth. They'll be there till 2039. And Neptune is going to bring into this place of advanced learning, college, broadening your horizons forever. Neptune brings more of a spiritual or inspired angle to that advanced learning. So, whether it is just being very inspired to go to college or take a certificate program, or it being like a spiritual pursuit, those are definitely two options. So, either spiritual or just very inspired and ready to go and do it. Very hopeful and faithful with Neptune around. And also, if you are someone who mass communicates stuff, publishes, whether it's your music, your words, your dance, whatever you're sharing broadly, Neptune can add a spiritual flair to that. But they're also, I consider Neptune, as I talked about earlier in the video, creativity fuel. So when it comes to these pursuits of mass communication, there might be a lot of creativity that comes in or a lot of inspiration for what to communicate. And it can also be a glamour factor. So if you need to make your mass communicated material, I guess, okay, there's a whole spectrum here. And depending on the ethics of the situation, you have material that is very well received. It's glossy, it's shiny, it looks good, it smells good, it sounds good. Neptune is making it kind of fit this ideal form. That might be what is being shared here. All the way to kind of propaganda, for lack of better words. So, depending on what your job is, depending on what you're dealing with in the advanced knowledge sphere, I mean, you could be dealing with persuasive types of speech or displays, yours or others. Neptune is going to be adding a lot of interesting elements to the realms of publishing and mass comm. Neptune is a planet of confusion. So, confusion around advanced education paths. If you're, whether to do one, if you're in one, what focus to study on, that might be tough with Neptune in here in terms of making those decisions. And it might be more of an intuitive, instinctual decision. Of course, coming back to the table and considering, material factors and, material limits, but also those voices of hell yes, hell no, those voices of instinct and intuition are really going to be important when you're navigating advanced study opportunities, long distance travel, worldviews, beliefs, philosophies, and mass communication. Uh, Now, with the ninth house being long distance travel, this is your warning to leave early for the airport for the next 14 years. I'm sorry, it's a very long time. But with any long distance travel stuff, Neptune could add confusion. So double checking the itinerary, the departure and takeoff, landing times, all of that, and doing your best. And sometimes you do your best and the confusion is around you with those topics or at the airport. So just know that Neptune might be bringing that in over the next 14 years. Your When it comes to the ninth house, your views and philosophies can come in. Now, that can be, already if you have a religious worldview or if you have a set of spiritual frameworks that you subscribe to. When Neptune comes in here, it can kind of go off into one of two fields. One of them is that it just dials up on the kind of mysticism, occultism, esotericism, just like very spiritual and very going on vibes. And your worldviews could get more and more inspired in that way. The other way could be confusion around views. Which framework is the best that would let me be, with Aries up here? What belief frameworks would let you be the most yourself, the most expressive of who you are, honestly? That seems more like what Neptune could be doing here in terms of like, it could be inspiring you into certain frameworks. It could also be confusion around those frameworks. So letting that be the case and letting that be part of the path. So it's not always going to be clear. I think that is kind of the trade-off with Neptune. We get that connection with spirituality much more strong, but it can be confusion. I think that's it. Oh, one more thing with Leo rising and Neptune being in your ninth. If your midheaven is in your ninth house, that is going to bring career topics, public life topics into this discussion of Neptune. So the glamour factor, yes, being able to share something spiritually, creatively in a public way or in your career becoming more spiritual or artistic or creative or inspired, navigating your career with more intuition. All of that would track for your 10th house topics as well. If your midheaven is in the ninth house in Aries, if you're a Leo rising. Now, also confusion and lack of clarity. The closer Neptune is to that midheaven degree, the more there's going to be that sense of confusion or lack of clarity about the outcome. So, last discussion here for Leo rising. Now, Saturn rules your seventh and your sixth houses, and Neptune's influence of spirituality and confusion, intuition, is now applying to the seventh house of relationships, others, clients, business partners, romantic partners. All of those one-on-one important contacts are being affected by Neptune. It could be the other people becoming more spiritual. It could be the other person is confused and you're supporting them through that. It could be that your relationships become more spiritual or inspired. It could be that you're using more intuition in how you navigate relationship. It could also be confusion or lack of clarity around these topics. So for the next year, peaking in February of 2026 and then waning and getting better after that, if there's confusion about partners, if the partners themselves are confused, that should start to clear up more in 2026. Now, you also have Saturn ruling your sixth house of labor, pets or animals, and health. And so those areas of life may also become more spiritual, inspired, or creative over the next year. Labor, pets, animals, health, they may also become more confusing over the next year. So doing your best to just take the next step, two steps that would be helpful to take. Not giving medical advice, but if you're working through a diagnosis and there's some difficulty in finding a diagnosis, confusion around that between now, February, March of 2026, That could be one outcome, and know that that clarity should improve after February 20th of 2026, increasingly as Saturn gets away from Neptune. Now, this could be the classic, my cat won't eat this kind of food. I cannot tell what this cat will eat. Hang in there for a year. And hopefully in 2026, the food situation with the cat will work itself out. Um, and finally, sixth house can be conflict. It is the joy of Mars, after all. The sixth house of labor, usually exploitative or underpaid labor. Depends on how much agency we have. Do you choose to be, kind of just working to pay the bills, or are you in an exploitative situation? All of that can be sixth house to the point of being conscripted for a war. The sixth house is conflict in very general. So now over the next year, when it comes to conflict, you could be really inspired to do a conflict if you're a Leo rising. You could have a lot of inspired, healthy conflict. Conflict can be done healthily. Confrontation is necessary many times. It's just very difficult to do so skillfully. That itself is an art. And so finding creative ways to do conflict. The Buddha talks about how much more creative you have to be to not do harm, to not kill, essentially. You have to be very creative. So that will be within our grasp for the next year. Also, the sixth house of conflict, confusion. So if there's confusion leading to conflict, or conflict leading to confusion, just do your best to fact check, fact check, fact check, and do your best to not make assumptions, I guess, over the next year. Is that's a real thing when Neptune is touching the Lord of conflict. So, we could even put together some conflict over beliefs. That's not a difficult delineation to make at this point on the globe or in the world history. It's not just America. You look around and there's a lot of places that there's conflict, a lot of conflicts abroad. This could even be, okay, sixth house is activism and service work. So taking a different angle on this and the current state of the world being so difficult for so many people and nations, Leo rising, maybe you're doing service work that's super inspired or spiritually motivated, or just coming from a really beautiful, generous place. That could be another way this comes out is just really spiritually inspired activism on behalf of maybe what you believe and value. So that would be a really neat way that that could come out. But for the next year, when it comes to the office space, could be confusion. Do your due diligence when you're communicating with your colleagues. That's all you can do is your best. So good luck, Leo rising. And yeah, I think that's all I have for Leo. All right, Virgo rising. We've got Neptune in your eighth house. We've got Saturn ruling over your sixth and your fifth. So these influences of spirituality, I mean, for the next 14 years, really infusing into your eighth house of shared resources, other people's resources, complex finances. I mean, I don't know. Usually not a very spiritually uh, infused place, the financial portfolio. But maybe, in this eighth house, very much we end up giving sometimes or sharing what we have with others. And so Neptune in here could be that very inspired sharing or giving, collaborating with others in this really spiritual way, even if it's not like a spiritual take on your retirement account. Um, the eighth house is also end of life topics. It's death. It is the spiritual component of that in the eighth, but also the logistical and financial parts of estate management and planning. And Neptune in here really, again, finding inspiration for how to navigate those topics, how you want those topics to go down for you, how you want your death to happen, essentially, or those of your loved ones. Neptune might be feeling really inspired to, yeah, figure all that out, sort all of that out, so it's all taken care of earlier, better than later. Neptune is also confusion around these topics. So confusion around collaboration, other people's resources, sharing, end of life management, If there's fog here over the next 14 years, just keep taking the next two steps you know to take, the next two skillful things, or the next one skillful thing you know to do, even if that's calling your financial advisor or calling your local death worker to help to navigate what might be confusing around these areas. Also, uncertainty. Now, I don't think it's going to be like every day for the next 14 years, you're going to have uncertainty with your complex finances. But there could be things that arise from time to time that are going to be confusing or uncertain about complex finances, about debts, taxes, investments, stocks, bonds, trading. I'm not giving financial advice. I don't know anything about finances except that they exist. Uh, Neptune, not great usually. It's not great for material world holding on. It's very good for dissolving and letting go. So do your best to kind of, it's like maintaining a shoreline and keeping it from eroding. And we do that by sandbagging, by doing different things to the land to keep it from eroding. So you might have to be doing that a little extra over the next decade or so. But a little shorter term, Neptune is going to be affecting your sixth and your fifth. But I guess, hold on, before I do that, one last thing about Neptune in the eighth, intuition. So, really using that intuitive barometer, that intuitive compass to navigate eighth house topics. I'm not giving financial advice, but this would theoretically be using intuition to make complex financial decisions, or using, your spiritual values to define how you do complex finances. So, for instance, yeah, if I've got a certain amount of money and my spiritual values are such that I want to share with certain groups that are underserved, that would be a really fitting way of Neptune to be coming out in the eighth. But intuitively speaking, it could also be coming out that way. So don't be afraid to consider it as one voice at the table. I'm not going to consider it as the only voice at the table with any complex or end of life kind of big decisions. Like I'm not just going on vibes. But one very important voice at that table with Neptune might be that kind of hell yes, hell no instinctual response to something. And then we can think about all the other, nuts and bolts around it, but don't forget about that intuitive voice when Neptune is around. And final point for Virgo risings, Neptune, the spirituality, creativity, intuition, but also confusion and uncertainty. That is going to be affecting your sixth and fifth houses. So when it comes to romance, rest, fun, children, uh, gifts, there could be just a lot of inspiration, spirituality involved in those topics or navigation of those topics. Creativity fuel. This is a great period of time, the next year for creativity. A lot of for the next year as well, with any of these fifth house topics, fun, rest, creativity, romance, children, all of that, just much more creative, spiritual over the next year. And then the sixth house of labor, animals, health, conflict. Those areas also may be becoming more spiritual, spiritually navigated. Those areas of life, there might be more inspiration toward a certain approach, toward pets, health, labor, conflict. Neptune also is confusion. So, around fifth house topics of children, there could be confusing things. Maybe it's the children who are confused. Confusion is a natural part of the learning process. It's like if we weren't confused, we wouldn't need to learn. So, that would really make sense if you're over the next year, your kids were learning a lot in states of confusion. Confusion about children, confusion about sex or romance, a lack of clarity around sex or romance or dating. So I would say, whether it's your own family, whether it's a relationship with children, whether it is a romantic relationship, we need to do extra work in being clear, extra work in being realistic, uh, and being just doing our due diligence, over communicating very clearly, even if it's uncomfortable, our expectations, our hopes, our fears around these topics. I don't want to scare anyone romantically, but it is a recipe for confusion or deception. So making sure, especially in situations where there's more than two people involved, making sure everyone is communicating so well and clear. Clear is kind. Kind is not always comfortable. Sometimes being kind is so hard because you have to hurt someone's feelings or because it's like it's true, it's going to be helpful for them to know, but they're not going to like hearing it. Like that is extremely loving and kind behavior. And I think we're going to need a lot of that over the next year, all of us. But for Virgo risings, that kind of clear is kind thing is going to especially come up in the fifth and the sixth. So with children, fun, rest, needing rest, doing rest, um, the sixth house of labor, pets, health, and two, confusion around, not that I'm giving medical advice, but if there are diagnoses that are difficult to come by between now and February of 2026, that could be one way this comes out. Just keep taking the next two steps you know are skillful to take. Take breaks when you need to in that journey. It's a lot of work, a lot of energy that can go into finding a diagnosis. Neptune's not helping. They're not helping us find a diagnosis. Now, let's say you do know what's going on with your health. Maybe your approaches are going to become more spiritual, more intuitive over the next year. Sixth house, pets, animals. Use your intuition. You might be easier to connect with them in a lot of ways with animals over the next year. But confusion potentially around animals. So do your best that, you could be doing everything on your end, but maybe you pick up a medication from the pharmacy and there's confusion or a mistake with the dose. I don't want to make anyone, paranoid, but Virgo rising with your pets, that's another area to really do some due diligence, or with if you have animals or livestock, just really doing your due diligence and knowing if things come up, yeah, that could be the case. And over the next year, that will start to wane, especially around March, April of 2026. A lot of that energy of confusion or lack of certainty or clarity, that'll lighten up a lot. Okay. Oh, and last thing. So if the sixth house is conflict, this is pick your battles energy. This is, be clear about what you're battling about, what you're fighting about. Make sure you've got your facts straight and that they have their facts straight. And that's going to help a lot. We don't want to get into fights that are leading to a lot of confusion or confusion that's leading to conflicts that don't need to happen. So just over the next year, being, giving it a bit of time, sleeping on it for a few nights before you get into a conflict that may, sometimes they need to happen, sometimes they don't. All right, good luck, Virgo rising. Libra rising. Now we've got Neptune in your seventh house. So the seventh house of partners, marriage partners, business partners, also your clients, your one-on-one people. If you have patience, that's the seventh house. It is also a place of open adversaries, people who you know and they know you don't get along. That's a thing that happens for some people, not everyone, but that's a seventh house topic. So for the next 14 years, and more or less depending on what degree your descendant is in. So, the closer Neptune is to your descendant, the stronger these themes are going to be. The further Neptune is away from your descendant degree, those topics will wane. These topics of confusion, of lack of clarity, these topics around spirituality, creativity, all of that is Neptune. And so for the next several years, till 2039, that's when Neptune leaves Aries. But this is going to be a time where partnerships may get more of a spiritual kind of tone or flavor. If it's not you in partnership that's becoming more spiritual, if it's not the relationship itself that's becoming more spiritual, it could be the other person. So this could be marriage partners, business partners, clients, or patients. They are getting more spiritual over the next, 14 years potentially. Uh, Neptune is intuitive. There could be more intuition going on in how you navigate partnership. It could also be the other people that are really becoming much more intuitive or much more connected to that intuitive muscle. So don't be scared of, already with Aries in your seventh, I recommend that people listen to that instinct with other people with that they have with partners or partnerships. Listen to that hell yes, hell no kind of instinctual barometer that Aries gives. But now with Neptune here, it's just so much more intuitive and instinctual. So that is a very powerful voice at the table when navigating partnership over the next 14 years. It's a big change. It could also be your approach to partnership becomes more spiritually inspired. It could be a lot of inspiration coming from partnership, a lot of inspiration coming from others, which is fine and great. It's one of the great parts about other people is that they're a source of inspiration. Uh, but also Neptune, they're not art specifically, they're not creativity specifically, but the way that they dissolve the borders and boundaries around things, it really helps with creativity to make connections and to put things together in new, cool ways. So maybe you and your partners are doing that kind of creativity together. That could be really cool. Now, Neptune really dissolves the boundaries between you and the other in this position. And so you may have to be extra strong and diligent about your energetic hygiene over the next decade and a half, really making sure that, yeah, energetic hygiene with others. That's in keeping those boundaries. Not that boundaries should be rigid. And I think Saturn getting kind of dried out in Aries, they're going to want to be a bit more rigid. But it's going to be hard. Like Neptune doesn't make it easy for Saturn to maintain boundary. So for the next 2.5 years, but really for the next 14, having some kind of energetic hygiene process when you work or are with people, that could be really, really helpful for Libra rising. And just in general too, beyond energetics for the next year and a half, for the next year with partners, with patients, clients, other people. It might be like a little extra work to maintain those boundaries, or you might notice certain boundaries have been eroded a little bit and you have to tend to them a bit more. So over the next year, just do your best with that. And again, it could also be your partners dealing with that issue and you're fine and you're just supporting them. Now, Saturn also rules your fifth and your fourth houses. And so Neptune's effects are also going to affect these places and their life topics. So, more spirituality, more creativity, more inspiration around fourth house home, dwellings, parent relationships, ancestors and ancestor relationships, more inspiration, spirituality, creativity with the land, with agriculture, with literal dirt. Um, I guess you're earthy, but the fourth house too is all of those things. Your private life might be get more spiritual and it might be private. Maybe you're sharing it with your partner, but in the fourth house, it could be a bit more private. But also confusion with some of these topics. So confusion around home, living situations, confusion or uncertainty around that. That is not fun. Now, that is again on the map for about a year. It peaks in February of 2026. So, uncertainty around home or living situations after 2026 should start to, the dust should settle. We should start to have more and more clarity as we go into the middle part of 2026. Parent relationships, making sure that those are, being managed, taken care of as best as you can if that's part of your life. Could be a hard time maintaining boundaries around parent relationships or even like the people you live with in your home. It could be that classic, like, I can hear through these walls kind of situation. But also, yeah, lack of clarity around parent relationships. It could be the parents that are having confusion or lack of clarity. That's a natural part of life sometimes. So, how are we navigating that over the next year? And then knowing that after February of 2026, if there is a lot of parent confusion, lack of clarity, that should get better in 2026. The fourth house is our past. So, taking spiritual approaches to considering their past, our past conditioning, intergenerational themes, whether it's stories, recipes, trauma, having a spiritual lens as we work through those things or engage with those topics or people or events. Neptune is really great at acceptance and forgiveness. But I think, sometimes those aren't always together. You don't just because you've accepted something doesn't mean that forgiveness is involved all the time. And just because forgiveness is involved doesn't mean there's always acceptance of certain things. Neptune is acceptance and forgiveness. So if either of those themes come up around parents, home, past, ancestors, that might be what's going on for the next year until, mid 2026. Lack of clarity, confusion. This could be the classic trying to figure out how grandma made her lasagna. Why is it so hard? I know that recipe is somewhere. Like that would be a very classic this. Confusion in your private life, lack of clarity around private life, however that might come out. I don't want to scare anyone, but deception, So how can we be as honest as possible? How can we be as clear as possible? Because there is a chance, a potential here for a lack of clarity, and sometimes that can come through in omissions, lies, etc. So around, if you're finding a home, finding a place to rent over the next year, especially around February 2026, this is like when you're going through to rent a place, see if you're going to rent, and you open all the drawers to make sure they function correctly. You look for mold around the toilet, you look for mold around the sinks, like really being careful for Libra rising, like living situations, just really doing your extra due diligence around those things so that there's nothing that gets unnoticed that needs to be noticed. And I think that's it for the fourth. The fifth house. So if you have a creative practice, if you have hobbies, if you do stuff for fun, it might get more creative. You might have a lot of inspiration. You might want to do a bunch of different things. Over the next year, there might be a lot of inspiration coming in, whether or not you're able to act on all of it. But yeah, plucking those inspirations out of the sky can be so great. Um, Even if we look at it later. The fifth house is romance, it's sex, it's fun, it's rejuvenation. So those areas getting more creative, more flexible, acceptance about any kind of romantic topic, acceptance around sex, sexuality, all of that could be very Neptune affecting the Lord of the fifth house. Spirituality, more spirituality for fun, or spiritual things imbuing the fun, spiritual concepts imbuing the romantic or sex life. This is like the classic, like, I don't know, like spiritual sex where people are like blissing off into some other realm. That could be that. That would be nice. Um, but it can also be confusion. So I don't want to make anyone paranoid, but with dating, with sexual health, with all those things, just be on your game, on your A game. Get tested for STIs, be having frank, open discussions with loved ones, romantic partners, so that there's not confusion. So watching out for confusion. If there's confusion about romance, whether or not to engage with it at all, who to be romantic with, that there might be confusion over that over the next year. I hope, I wish this on no one, but having to make hard decisions between people if you're monogamous, yeah, the next year could be a little murky. So just taking the next 2, 3 steps are skillful to take, or inactions that are skillful to take, and giving connections and partnerships time to prove themselves before committing. That's going to be really important over the next year. And not to say you can't be in or shouldn't be in relationship or connecting. Yeah, and maybe it's extra romantic and ooey gooey and dreamy right now, but don't go off on that dopamine train into sillyville. Um, you know, you might want to like pump the brakes and just, slow and steady wins the race. That's what I would say, romantically speaking. So, a different topic here now. When it comes to the fifth house of children, this could be them being more spiritual, getting engaged with more spiritual topics, artistic, creative, having more inspiration themselves. Maybe the children are inspired or inspiring, and also confusion. So this is something that is natural in terms of the learning process. Like we wouldn't need to learn if we weren't first confused. Confusion is part of learning. And so if the children are in just a process of learning a lot of things and there's a lot of confusion for the next year, yeah, that could very well be the case. Um, so over communicating, doing your best to mitigate potentials for misunderstanding with kids over the next year is going to be prudent. And when it comes to things about child rearing and just the logistics, the daily grind of being a parent, confusion around those things, the permission slip for the field trip or getting lost or, some communication getting lost around children or any of that. For the next year, you might have to do your due diligence or be a little flexible if someone else drops the ball and there's confusion as a result. So hang in there. That's about for a year. And then after February of 2026, those things should start to improve. All right. I think that's what I have for Libra Rising. Good luck. I hope everything goes great. Good luck. And let's talk to Scorpio Rising. So, Neptune being in Aries in your sixth, bringing inspiration, bringing instinct and intuition into how you navigate labor, health, animals, and conflict over the next 14 years. Maybe taking a more spiritual approach to health, labor, pets, conflict. Um, this is a planet that dissolves the boundaries between self and other. You may find between now and 2039 that you can connect with animals really well. Now, when it comes to the labor space, and this is also activism in the sixth house, we can see like service work. It's like, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm doing this out of the kindness of my heart, or I'm not getting paid enough. Maybe that is very inspired and active during the next 14 years, or taking kind of a spiritual motivation towards service work. That would be very Neptune in the sixth. Now, Neptune, also spirituality and how you manage your health, pets, all of that's here. Neptune is also lack of clarity, confusion. So if there's confusion around health, not that I'm giving medical advice, but sometimes it's hard to find a diagnosis. Um, Hang in there and just keep taking the next two steps that are skillful or helpful to take in that journey. But there could be some fog or confusion around how to take care of health, identifying threats to health, um, confusion around animals, caretaking of animals, confusion around the daily chores or tasks, around labor spaces, the daily grind. So, just doing your best to over communicate, communicate expectations, communicate needs, and there's only so much you can do. Neptune can also be other people being that confusion or being confused. So you might be fine. It could be the people you're laboring with. It could be the people in your activism group that there's confusion in there or something. But again, it's also the spiritual slant, it's also the creativity. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very helpful. Depends on what we're doing. Now, Saturn rules the fourth and the third. And so Saturn's going to be bringing in topics from these places. Neptune's going to be affecting those topics. So Neptune is going to be affecting the third house of community, familiar people, places, things. Very much, again, like a spiritual tone to this place. Is there more engagement with your local spiritual communities? Are the familiar people in your life more aware of your spirituality over the next year? Is the next year a time when you get in touch with those spiritual communities? And the third, we have siblings, cousins, extended relatives, aunts, uncles. They might be getting more spiritual over the next year. They might be getting more inspired. Um, the third is a place of short distance travel. Now, this is where I'm going to get into the confusion piece. Neptune can be confusion. So, for the next year, this is your warning to be very careful when you're driving, no texting and driving. Be very clear, very aware when you're doing any kind of tooling around the neighborhood. Just for a year, it's going to peak. Be extra careful January, February of 2026. Um, there can be confusion. Sometimes that confusion is just when like the stoplight goes out and it's just blinking red and people have to take turns and they start treating it like a four-way stop. That is confusion in traffic, like it's nothing horrible happening, but having to navigate like a detour. So leaving early for events, leaving early for things, paying attention to the best of your ability when you're doing any third house locomoting, um, any third house short distance travel, over communicating with third house people, those extended relatives, siblings, communities. Uh, this is a place of divination, dream divination. Uh, I mean, that having a more spiritual kind of influence, sure. Neptune helps us to connect with the ether. So, maybe over the next year, your intuition is just on fire and awesome. Maybe your divination is just going very swimmingly over the next year if you're a Scorpio rising. So that could be very cool. This could be reading a lot of spiritual texts or reading a lot of inspiring things. This could be learning new things that are very spiritual or inspiring. And this could be confusion in learning new things. Now, third house, third house being learning new things. Uh, Part of learning is confusion. We wouldn't need to learn it if we weren't confused. So I don't want us to worry that like Neptune being with the third house lord for a year means you're not going to be able to learn well for a year. Maybe what you're learning about is just Neptunian. But if there's a lack of clarity in the learning process, that's okay. Ask questions, ask for help, hang in there. Like, don't quit because you're confused. That just is a sign that there's understanding that's coming in slowly. If you're working toward it, if you're working at, untangling confusion or finding a way out of confusion, um, you'll get there eventually, if you just keep trying. But with this fog, it's like I'm learning this new thing and I'm going to just keep taking the next two steps, the next two steps, the next two steps. So, last thing, Saturn rules your fourth house. So now the fourth house of home, parents, dwelling, ancestry, past, our private life, all of that. There's so much in the fourth house. Intergenerational themes, recipes, trauma, all of that's in the fourth. Our living situations, our parents. It's getting the Neptune treatment. So there could be more of a spiritual approach to family, to home, to the land, a more spiritual approach to our relationship with our ancestors. There could be a lot of creativity, a lot of intuition coming in and navigating relationships with parents and ancestors. Intuition being used in the living situation and making decisions around that. Uh, Neptune is also confusion. And so, confusion around any of these fourth house topics of living situation. So, this is for the next year. So if there's this more spiritual approach to home, parents, living situation for the next year, more of an intuitive approach to home, parents, living situation over the next year, and watch for confusion. So if and for things being unseen or misunderstood. So if you are looking for an apartment or looking to buy a home over the next year and peaking in 2026, there could be confusion or a lack of clarity. So don't skip the inspection. Get the house inspection. This is where you're like opening all the drawers and checking for mold all over the apartment before you sign the lease. This is doing your due diligence very much with matters of home and living situation, trying to mitigate confusion. This could be a difficulty with maintaining boundaries around home situations. The classic, being able to hear through the walls, or, if there's a lot of people living under the same roof, how to make sure that everyone's boundaries are honored. That might be a kind of difficult area over the next year. So just doing your best to maintain those boundaries, including energetic boundaries, um, parents, ancestors, all of that over the next year might be needing extra attention. There could be confusion with parents, with the relationship with the parents themselves. Know that that should clear up as well after February of 2026. If there's certain relationship dynamics going on that you're not really, there's just a lot of lack of clarity. Um, Over the next year, you might be navigating that. And then over the course of like the first half of 2026, more clarity coming in, more understanding, more realism. Um, I would be try to be on your game in terms of communicating expectations with living situation, parents, also, office mates, labor spaces, making sure that everyone is aware of each other's expectations, standards, and that we're all kind of doing our best to communicate and navigate through those things. Uh, Confusion around past. Sometimes the fourth is our past. It is all of our conditioning that preceded us. And so there might be some confusion over the next year around that, maybe working through learning about the past and finding new things out, working through confusion that way. That could be another place of fruitful activity over the next year. And then finally, with fourth house, it is our private life. So there can be more of a spiritual thing happening in the life and you're private about it. Or, maybe there's some confusion in the private life of some kind. That could be the case. Uh, all to say, any kind of uncertainty, I expect it to start getting better, especially by mid 2026. So if we can just do what we know are the next skillful few things to do regarding these topics and hang in there for a year, that's going to be the best approach. Scorpio rising, one thing I forgot to mention for you is that, of course, the third house is also communication and writing. And so over the next year, you may have to be extra clear about what you're trying to say. Or if there is a lack of clarity that's coming up around communication, know that that should start to get better around mid 2026. So that's especially February 2026, you might need to be extra doing your best to be clear. And hopefully other people are not being too confusing, but hang in there for a year. It should get better in 2026. Good luck, Scorpio rising. All right, Sagittarius rising. This is affecting a few places for you. So Neptune is currently in Aries, and it's going to be there till 2039. Neptune is in your fifth house now of fun, play, children, creativity, rest, romance, sex, all of the fun kind of things that we do to fill our cup and to rejuvenate really lives in the fifth house. And Neptune is going to be bringing potentially more of a spiritual angle to those activities or things, more of a spiritual approach. We could be using more intuition and navigating those areas of life. And we could be also having more confusion or a lack of certainty around those areas. Neptune can be so good in terms of acceptance and forgiveness. And so yeah, like fifth house people, children, lots of acceptance and forgiveness with romantic partners, acceptance, forgiveness. They don't always go together, but both of them are Neptune, so there's a potential for either of them. With your own art, your own creative stuff, acceptance of what that is. Uh, Neptune is creativity fuel. It helps us to make connections and mix things together. So if your children are getting more creative with Neptune and Aries, if your creativity is ratcheting up and getting even more awesome over the next 14 years, have fun with that. Uh, if your romantic partners are Neptunian, if they're spiritual or creative or artistic, yeah, that would fit Neptune in the fifth. But on the other side of that coin, there is the confusion and uncertainty, as I had mentioned. So, is it that there is confusion around romance, whether or not to be engaged with it, which partners to choose, what activities or approaches to romance to choose? If there's confusion around that, that's a very real possibility. Um, Children, confusion around those topics, how to raise children, the children themselves might even be confused. So this is going to be part of the influence for about 14 years. For better or for worse, there's going to be a kind of a mixed bag of things here. Now, Saturn, this is a little shorter of a story. Saturn is going to be affected by Neptune for about a year from the date that I record this, April of 2025. Saturn-Neptune conjunction is peaking February of 2026. So then these Saturn-Neptune influences should start to wane. But for the next year, doing extra due diligence to be clear around money, resourcing, your needs, your values, what you value, what you have, your things and stuff. There could be confusion around that. Confusion around money for the next year, confusion around what you can share, with others even over the next year. So do your best, communicate, over communicate with people in your life if money is involved so that everyone's on the same page, just avoiding any potential for misunderstanding, even around the time that you could give or the energy that you could give around something. Making sure everyone's really clear about that. Also, the third house. Third house has a long list of things. It is our siblings, in laws, cousins, aunts, uncles, pretty much everyone who's not your parents. There could be confusion from those people, or spirituality. Maybe you're taking more of a spiritual approach with your money. Maybe you're taking a more spiritual approach with your in laws. Maybe your in laws are getting more spiritual. Maybe the siblings are getting more spiritual. So, something about those folks, that's one of the possibilities. The third house is also divination. It's the practice of our regular beliefs. So your practice of regular beliefs could become more spiritual, a little bit more inclined toward the esoteric. There could be a lot of creativity or artistry around divination or ritual in the third. And it's a place of communication. So the third house is communication for you. And so being extra clear over the next year about communications. Sometimes we are doing our due diligence, we are over communicating, we're communicating clearly, and other people are not. That is a very real possibility here. So, doing your best to make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of your third house people, your siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, your communities, the people you see regularly, that you talk regularly to at the office. All of those places are potentially places of confusion over the next year, or confusion in communicating with those people or places over the next year. Do your best. The third house is also short distance travel. It is mobility. So look alive. No texting and driving for a year. No, texting and walking across the street. When you are moving around the world, pay attention. When you're driving, pay attention. There could be confusion, and this could also be beyond you. I mean, it could be a detour, it could be a confusing signage, it could be some kind of confusing thing, some kind of delay in short distance travel. So leave early. And one last thing for Sagittarius rising, if your IC, if your Imam Chile is in the fifth house, or if it's in the third, then we could start to see some topics of parents, home, living situations also being affected by Neptune. So for the next year until about March, April of 2026, after we get done with that February peak, um, make sure that you're doing your best to navigate confusion, lack of clarity with parents, with living situations. This is where I'd be checking all of the drawers before you sign the lease for the apartment. Don't skip the inspection if you're buying a home. We want to avoid any kind of confusion around living situations, buildings, and parents. The fourth house is also ancestry, intergenerational themes. Neptune could be, again, under these specific scenarios, if the IC is in the third or the fourth or the fifth, um, then there could be that confusion around those topics of ancestry, intergenerational things, which can come up, if you're working with your content of your past, working with a therapist, working with a geneticist, trying to find mom's meatball recipe. We could be taking spiritual approaches to all of that with Neptune affecting these topics, but it could also be confusion on the path over the next year. Know that there should be more clarity after February of 2026, increasingly after February of 2026, some of those topics will get more clear. That's the last thing for Sagittarius rising. Good luck. Capricorn rising. Neptune has now entered your fourth house of home, parents, living situations, past, ancestry, private life. And all of those Neptune influences are now going to be part of your experiences having to do with those topics. So, for instance, if Neptune is taking a more spiritual approach to something, that would be taking a more spiritual approach to your home or living situation, to the land, to your parent relationships, to ancestor relationships. It would be also potentially more confusion around those topics. So, over the next several years, really 14 years of Neptune being in this place, I mean, a lot of potential for spiritual experience, synchronicity, intuition being used to navigate these spaces, but also having to deal with confusion, lack of clarity, misunderstanding. So, doing your best to navigate that using over communication, using clear stating of expectations, clear stating of boundaries. And that might be one of the ways in which we see Saturn and Neptune come together in here. Could be boundaries around parents, fourth house, family, private life, people you live with, even maintaining those boundaries, especially over the next year. Not the whole 14 years, but especially with Saturn in here. It can be harder to maintain boundaries when Neptune is around. So just doing your best, especially over the next year into mid 2026, with boundaries related to fourth house people, if that is necessary. But another very important thing to consider, and this is where Capricorn and Aquarius rising are a very special case, is that you are Saturn. And so also topics of your first house are going to be affected by Neptune. And Saturn also rules your second house of money, resourcing, your time, your energy, your liquid assets, your skills. All of that is second house. That also is going to be affected by Neptune. So if we're looking at themes of self, identity, roles, mind, body, spirit, self, if you over the next year have more spiritual experiences, become more spiritual, or exploring more spiritual things, all of that could fit very well for Saturn conjoining Neptune, knowing that that's going to peak around February of 2026. Also, creativity. You might be noticing more creativity, easier in connecting with others or with spirit or other kind of being aware and open to the synchronicities and omens that is a very Neptune thing. So you might be having a front row seat for a lot of that. So really strong intuition potentially right now for both Capricorn and Aquarius rising. Intuition might be a very valuable voice. I think it usually is. We don't need astrology to say that, but it's going to be even more of a strong, potent source of insight, I think, over the next year. Trusting intuition. I mean, it's such an interesting thing, especially for Saturn, especially for Capricorn and Aquarius. They're such rational, logical, systematic, methodical type signs. They don't go on vibes. They don't go on faith. They go on evidence, which is very different because Neptune is literally faith. Neptune is, believing in the mystical, the magical. It is other realms. It's the connection of all things. It's pretty different. So doing your best with it and having fun with it, that's what I would recommend. At the same time, front row seat for confusion, misunderstanding. So especially over the next year, making sure that you're doing your best to be clear and just being patient if there is some difficulty in being perceived clearly by others, being understood by others. It's tough when Neptune is around. So that in particular starts to improve into the middle of 2026. Confusion around identities or self. I mean, confusion is a natural part of the learning process. So, learning about the self, if there's confusion in the course of just learning about the self, learning about your preferences, your needs, your health, Neptune can be a natural part of that process, although it's not a comfortable part of that process. So, just knowing that that could be a big signature over the next year. The body is so impermanent and the body changes so much, and especially depending on different health journeys that people have. Our appearances are not stable. None of this stuff stays the same. And I think Neptune really highlights that because it can be that really disillusion of self, breaking down of self into its next form. So over the next year, just any changes that might be a brewing, kind of letting them happen as they're going to happen and gently hold space for that. And same advice would go for Aquarius Rising. Um, Now, I guess with second house topics. Nope, before I go to second house topics, last thing about first house topics, health, the body. So any confusion around that, we might have to be a little bit, doing our due diligence, putting in extra effort to try to circumvent or avoid confusion or misunderstanding around health matters. I'm not giving medical advice. I don't want to scare anyone, but Neptune is confusion. And in this case, the first house is the body. Now, that can be confusion on our part. It can also be external to us, just in the general surroundings. So, this would be the classical, like, you know, watch out for medication errors, watch out for misunderstandings about health things. Reading the nutritional label wrong or reading the supplement label and doing it wrong. I've done that. I just bought the wrong cranberry for myself and I was totally wrong about how I was using it. Eh, these things happen. Um, Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's people around us. So just look alive a little bit. And if you're someone who is on like an elimination diet or some kind of specific diet where you have to be really careful about what's in the environment, what's in your food, Neptune can be that lack of clarity around what is in the environment. So just being, I don't want to again make anyone paranoid, but just being extra careful about what is in your food, your topical products, your creams, your ointments, and just making sure it's what you want in there and then it's not something that you're allergic to or are trying to actively avoid. There can just be, again, confusion. So yeah, do your best. And then when it comes to second house things for the next year, clearing up mid 2026, we're going to see the second house be affected by Neptune. So the second house is money, resources, liquid assets. And so confusion around that, lack of clarity around resources, lack of clarity around your money. So just being extra diligent about your money, keeping track of it, being really clear with others about the time and the energy that you can give to things, and being really real with yourself and not being delulu about what you can give in a certain situation. I know Capricorn is super competent and capable, but we don't want to be having those really healthy boundaries around give and take. We don't want those being eroded by Neptune and then getting us into situations where we're overextended. So, very clear as best your ability about your money stuff, about your resourcing until March, April of 2026. One last thing, thinking about the first house being Capricorn, the self, the mind, body, spirit, the appearance. and Capricorn risings being represented by Saturn, Neptune can be a glamour factor in that ability to create, this perfect form or ideal version or this vision or fantasy. That kind of thing is conjunct with you, dear Saturn person. So if you need to use the glamour skills over the next year, it's a good year for that. So have fun with that. It might be really helpful practically speaking, or just fun to experience personally. So really playing with style, being imaginative and dreamy with your style of presentation of presenting yourself. That would be a really fun thing to do with this transit. Good luck, Capricorn. All right, for Aquarius rising, we've got Neptune in your third, and we've got Saturn bringing in the 12th and the first houses. So Neptune coming into your third house until 2039. That could be a more spiritual influence on third house topics like things that you're learning, things that you're teaching that are more foundational. Third house is siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, in-laws. Those people could be becoming more spiritual. Your local communities. Maybe you're getting engaged with more spiritual sides of your communities. The third is dream divination. It's our regular rituals or embodiment of our beliefs. And so we might be getting really inspired. Sometimes inspiration is much easier to find with Neptune around. So literally finding inspiration in your local space, in familiar people, places, things, having a really strong connection with intuition, divination. It could be really neat in a lot of those ways. Artistically, creatively, I think Neptune is jet fuel. So in your general thought sphere, there could be a bit more creativity. The third house is a place of communication. So our communication could become more creative, spiritual, but at the same time now, Neptune is confusion, lack of clarity. So all those same topics could be affected by Neptune's fogginess. So when it comes to communication, there might be trouble in communicating clearly when it comes to the relationships with communities, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, those relationships. It might be harder to have strong boundaries. So we might have to put in a little extra effort in terms of boundaries with those relationships if needed. Short distance travel, mobility, moving around in our familiar spaces. Neptune could create some confusion around that. There could be road work, detours, poor signage. So new spaces that you're not familiar navigating. So anything where there could be confusion, we might have to work extra hard to navigate that kind of short distance travel, or even things that should be familiar, there could be confusion. So just do your best and don't be hard on yourself if there is. Now with Saturn here, Neptune is also, by proxy, going to be affecting the first house of self, of mind, body, spirit, and the 12th house of spiritual life, spiritual, mental health, emotional health practices, suffering and its navigation, being alone, solitude, loneliness, all the fun 12th house things. Neptune's going to be affecting that for the next year, especially. And so Capricorn and Aquarius risings are really interesting in that they are both represented by Saturn. And so they have a very front row seat to this conjunction with Neptune. They themselves, so Aquarius, you yourself, in your identity, in yourself, you may feel more spiritual, or you may find it easier to connect with intuition, with the synchronicities, omens when you're out and about. It might be much easier with Neptune, with Saturn, with your chart ruler. Those things might just be very strong. So rely on your intuition, use that. That's a really strong thing right now, especially. I think that's a skill. Everyone has the skill of intuition, right? But it's a muscle that is either going to be, like mine when I came into this world. I think mine was a bit atrophied. I've had to work on my intuition muscles, but especially for Capricorn and Aquarius risings over the next year into mid 2026 is a great time to like really feel into and use that intuition muscle. So that's kind of neat. But confusion about self, uncertainty about self, about the identity, about the roles that you're doing. That might be the case over the next year. I expect much more clarity on the self, the identity, the roles mid 2026. Similarly, the first house is the body, it is the self. And so being aware that there could be some uncertainty or confusion around health matters over the next year. Doing your best to kind of walk through that fog, taking the next two steps, one step that you know is skillful or helpful to take on those matters, and then knowing again that those issues as well should clear up as Saturn gets away from Neptune. And when I say clear up, I mean become more clear, less confusion around what is going on, if there's anything going on. So one last thing, considering that Aquarius rising being represented by Saturn, the body, the physical form, the appearance, Neptune is a glamour factor in that ability to create a vision, the ideal version of something, imagine, be dreamy. You can get glamour. And so if over the next year, between now and mid 2026, if you need glamour for any reason, if you need to present yourself in a really special or kind of crafted way, almost good year for it. It's a great year for it. So if that's helpful. And just knowing, again, if I haven't said it explicitly before, it could be a really creative year. Even if you don't end up acting on all of your inspirations, write down whatever you're inspired about right now. If inspiration is easy to find over the next year, take advantage of it. You don't have to take all of those inspirations out to their final form. You can write them down for later. And that's another good thing to take advantage of when Neptune is around. It's the least we should get in return for dealing with the confusion and the uncertainty. Um, so then with the self, with the identities, with the roles, if there is any confusion, again, should be getting better in 2026, especially around March, April, after we get past that February peak of glamour, but also maybe uncertainty. Um, don't be too hard on the self. I kind of wonder if Neptune won't be having like this ideal version and Saturn really trying to make it real. So let's not let this Saturn Neptune thing become boundless criticism or boundless standards. That's one way this could come out. That would be less than ideal, ironically. Now, last thing to consider, Neptune's touching of the Lord of the 12th house for Aquarius risings. This means that there could be a more spiritual approach taken to mental health, emotional health. There could be more of a spiritual approach taken to matters of spirituality or how to navigate suffering. A lot of people use a lot of different ways of navigating pain and confusion and suffering and loneliness. Uh, Spirituality is one way. Neptune can be that. Neptune is also creativity. So when it comes to spiritual health, mental health, emotional health, it could be that the next year you experience a lot of creativity, making connections, having insights that you might not have had otherwise. So it could be a very insightful year. There could also be confusion on these things. And I think that happens too when we learn and we take in new spiritual frameworks or frameworks of dealing with, you know, the various internal landscapes. There can be confusion for a moment, reconsideration of things that we got to think about differently with the new information we have. So letting ourselves be confused about spiritual life, about spiritual practice, that happens. And know that when we get to mid 2026, that sort of thing should be a bit more clear if there is any confusion at all. There are a lot of overlapping significations when we start to look at the 12th house Lord, Saturn, Neptune. It's all secrets. It's all, signifiers for things that are hidden or potentially deceptive. And so I don't want to make anyone paranoid. It could be like that random hidden thing that you find in your familiar space, when this is all over. It could be that boring. But confusion around hidden things, I mean, already the hidden things were confusing. We didn't need Neptune to make it any more obscure. But yeah, when I say confusion about spiritual matters, it's like those things of the subconscious we're trying to make aware. We're trying to make things more conscious and just be aware of whatever's kind of going on underneath. And Neptune can be insight, it can also be confusion on those matters. If the spiritual road is a bit winding and tough over the next year, hang in there. It should feel much clearer in 2026. So finally, the 12th house can also be chronic health conditions, long-standing challenges. So in the course of chronic health conditions over the next year until mid 2026, if there is confusion, if there is some difficulty in navigating those topics, hang in there. It should get better in 2026, but there may be some fog on the road. So again, just taking that next step that you know is skillful or helpful to take, taking breaks when you need to, because this is a bit of a marathon through the fog, not a sprint. And again, it peaks in February of 2026. So if there's confusion, especially around then with chronic health conditions or just chronic challenges that last a long time, it could be any kind of challenge that just lasts a long time. Those things should start to have more clarity, more certainty around them, more March and April 2026 and beyond. So hang in there. And I guess I should say too, similar to the other examples, if you're taking more of a spiritual approach, an intuitive approach to chronic health or chronic conditions or long-standing challenges, that would also really track with this transit. So good luck, Aquarius Rising. And finally, Pisces Rising. We made it. I'm going to say a little extra stuff for you because now Neptune is out of your first house, which congratulations. Also, like, I mean, there's some things to maybe miss, you know, the spirituality, the creativity, the synchronicities, the seeing omens everywhere, the being connected with the other realms more easily. Like Neptune is great. The acceptance, the forgiveness, you know, there can be so many great things about Neptune. And also, it's really hard to keep boundaries when Neptune is around. That's one less challenge you have to deal with directly then with Neptune out of your first. It's going to be easier to maintain general boundaries. It's going to be more clear. Things are going to be more clear in terms of the self, the identities, the health, the body. All of that becomes more clear, less confusing when Neptune moves away. So that's nice. But now it's in your second. So Neptune is going to be in Aries, and I actually just got done with this. So I can speak to that. Having to be extra careful with money stuff, really till 2039, having to do your extra due diligence to keep things straight in terms of your resources, your finances, but also your time, your skills, your talents, really doing your best to maintain healthy boundaries. So, not so that we are getting into greed or holding on to our things. Like, you know, we can still do generosity, of course. You're a Pisces rising, you're going to be generous. But sustainability, reciprocity, fairness, making sure that the give and take between you and others, between you and other groups is the best to your the best of your ability, kind of honoring what you need and honoring what you have, you know, in terms of what you're able to give. Uh, the more clarity, the more communication, the more explicitly stated expectations you can have around what is yours and collaboration. That's really going to help. Making spreadsheets about your money, you know, keeping track of where your time, your money, your effort, your energy goes. If that helps with any confusion or leakiness, that might be the case when Neptune is in the second. Neptune is also very creative and spiritual. You could be taking some spiritual or creative approaches to your money management or to the management of your resources. And your skills and talents may become spiritual. You know, maybe you're going to end up having a spiritual set of skills. perhaps your values. This really abstractly, we can think of the second house as anything that's yours, but also anything that you kind of cherish. And that can also be values. So Neptune is giving that really spiritual inspiration to what you value over the next 14 years. Now, on a shorter time scale, Neptune is also going to be affecting Saturn ruled stuff, so the 12th and the 11th. And that means that friends and groups may also be influenced by Neptune. So maybe your friends and groups are getting more spiritual. Maybe they are being more creative and more cross pollinating and sharing. There's a lot more kind of open and free give and take when Neptune is around. So that could be part of your groups or friendships or networks. And the 11th is also our hopes, dreams, and aspirations. So maybe really inspired, spiritually motivated inspirations, really lofty, idealistic inspiration or aspirations, like things that you're working toward. As long as you're not like too hard on yourself about it. I know Capricorn moving toward an aspiration, like they really want to be competent and like do their best. Neptune can be kind of an idealist. So as long as you're not getting too hard on yourself about what you're moving toward, what you're working toward, and letting it be this just inspired thing that you're doing, that would be really great. If your friends and groups are also experiencing confusion, or if things are becoming confusing in those groups or in any friendships, that could also be Neptune's effect on Saturn. And so, really, over the next year. So, know that by the time we get to March, April of 2026, that a lot of this lack of clarity or confusion should start to clear up. So, do your best to over communicate with friends and groups, knowing where to meet, with who and when. There could just be over the next year a little bit more messiness with that kind of stuff logistically. Neptune will do that. Just do your best. And then the 12th house is also ruled by Saturn. Neptune's going to be then affecting some things of the 12th. And so your mental health, emotional health practices might be getting more spiritual. Maybe you started off doing like the meditation-based stress reduction, and now you're actually learning Buddhism. It's like the practices for the spiritual health may be becoming very transcendental or fluid, something more creative in that sphere. So enjoy that. It can be a really insightful time when Neptune and the 12th house and those topics are working with each other really well. And so again, over the next year, especially into mid 2026, could be a really insightful time with spiritual health, emotional health, mental health, and any of those practices that you do to maintain those things. Also, difficulty in maintaining boundaries, maintaining routines, maintaining structures. Neptune is really going to dissolve some of that motivation or not motivation, discipline of Saturn. And in that, it might be harder to keep up some of these practices, but just do your best. Really, over the next year, that might be an issue, and then it stops being as much of an issue, and it should become easier again to keep routines, the discipline. Neptune also is confusion and misunderstanding. So, with 12th house, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health practices, if there is confusion around those things over the next year, that's okay. That's going to happen in the course of learning, in the course of exploring. There will be moments where we don't know if this practice is going to actually help. I don't know if this, spiritual health, mental health modality is for me. Let it be unclear for a minute. Let it be uncertain. I think by the time we get to mid 2026, we're going to be feeling a lot more clear about the 12th house practices that are best for us. The 12th house is also a place of suffering, it's navigation, other people's suffering. And so when Saturn is trying to navigate this place, maybe it's not your suffering, maybe you're helping other people who are in the hospital or in a prison system or something like that. Neptune can really help those endeavors be very like spiritually inspired and motivated. So working with those populations that have been erased or disenfranchised, doing that from a really inspired place. At the same time, make sure that you're not jumping into things too quickly without the proper tools that you need. Um, I would just, the Aries impulse to go quickly based on that inspiration. Saturn's going to want to go a little bit slower. At the same time, the next year is such a nice time to really lean into that, whatever is inspiring us. So, with your own practices of the 12th house, just taking your time as much as you can with it. And if there is some confusion or lack of certainty about if it's the right thing, just know that that's going to start to feel better in second quarter of 2026. I think that's all I have. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. And hopefully, some of this stuff helped to validate things that maybe you've already been seeing with Neptune already having gone into Aries, and hopefully helping you prepare for what to expect over the next year as Saturn moves through Neptune. If there's any questions at this point, email me, aligninglighastro@gmail.com. You can comment below if you have any questions as well. And I guess check out, I'll do a little mutual aid highlight. Please check out the Bail Project. That is linked below, as well as Doctors Without Borders. Of course, if you want to book a session with me, check out my website. If you enjoy how I talk about things, how I explain things, if you want more details and how all of this applies to you personally, you can book a reading at my website, www.aligninglightastrology.com/booking. And you can actually, right now, I've got a promo code called LEAF, like a leaf on a tree, LEAF, for 10% off of forecasting readings. And I have that until the end of the month, till May 1st. So if you want to get a forecasting session, look at some of the astrology weather ahead, you can book that with me for a little bit of a discount. I also have a discount for anyone over 60. What did I do? 55, 60, 65. Y'all get 10% off just because you're a joy to read for. You've lived more life. It's so fascinating to talk to you. I feel like I should pay you. So I did a discount. Um, I think that's it. I've got a forecast at the end of every month, and I have not planned that yet, but I also do have a Q&A that happens every second Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's always a Thursday, second Thursday of the month. And people can bring their astrology questions. Usually I'll do a prompt a few days before on Instagram to gather any questions. You don't need to be present for me to answer them. Feel free to, just send them in and tune in later. I think that's all my announcements. Nothing has changed. Everything is the same. I hope everyone has a good year ahead with Saturn moving through Neptune. I mean, I think we're going to notice a lot of really neat things. There's going to be a lot of great ways of cohesion, the way that Neptune brings things together that wouldn't otherwise come together. At the same time, you heard me say it ad nauseum, lots of confusion to sit with, to move through slowly and carefully, and to know that it's not going to be forever. So, thanks again, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you next time.